The Straw Shoe Boy often goes to Talia Lane, Fulu Street, to deliver letters to his family these days. Almost every concierge knows this messenger, so it doesn't seem abrupt. Plus, the boy looks at ease, trotting down the Bluestone Street as usual, even if pedestrians will not take it seriously. Chimpingan was near the door of a house. In front of the door, there was a stone gandang, which was used to suppress evil and stop evil. It was half a person tall and looked like a military general. Chimpingan knew that this was the mansion of the Lee family. Every family has different ways of warding off evil spirit. Even the door gods posted on the gates are divided into civil and military, so it is easy to distinguish. He looked around quickly and continued on his way. Further ahead was the Song family. After the Song family was the Kiln Supervision and Manufacturing Office. There was a locust tree growing on the outer wall of the junction of the adjacent mansions of the Lee and Song families. The dry twigs and luxuriant foliage, although not comparable to the vicissitudes of the old locust tree in the town, but it is also impressive at first sight. In the mouths of the older generation, this locust tree and the towering old locust tree in the center of the town are said to be in the same line. The reason why Chimpingan came to Lee's house, not Lu Jengchun's town head surnamed Lu's house, is that when the young man left the government office, the elderly stewards sent him along, deliberately or unintentionally chatting about some parent's shortcoming. What is Zhao on this street? The family's reading seat. Zhao Yao has already left the town and will be appointed to be the top official of the champion in the future. There is a young lady in the Song family next door, and when she reaches the age of marriage, she can't even be a female celebrity. She only likes to dance with knives and guns. Where does it look like a daughter of daughters? Do you think it's funny or not? The old man was in a lot of trivial fun. Mixed with the trivial news, the Lee family house just arrived a distinguished guest. The little girl doll looks like a pink and jade, like a piece of royal porcelain. The big 18 changes must be a handsome and beautiful woman, and I don't know which family will be lucky to marry such a daughter-in-law into the family. On the way out of the back of the Ye office, the young man who didn't listen at first walked slowly, intentionally or unintentionally, and always carefully observed the building layout of the Ye office, and finally occasionally asked one or two digressions, like a pauper. I was curious about the wealth of the wealthy family, and the elderly stewards knew all about it. Taking the Song family next door and the Lee family further away as examples, I told the teenager about the courtyard distribution and various rules of the big families. The real intention of the steward is well known to the young man. It's just that Chimpingan didn't think about acting according to their wishes from beginning to end. At this time, slowly trotting forward along the street, Chimpingan saw that there was no one around. He suddenly exerted his strength, suddenly accelerated his pace, ran straight to the old locust tree, jumped, and stepped on the trunk one after another. After 4 steps, there was no sign of falling. But at that time, the sturdy boy was enough to reach out and grab a branch of the locust tree. Then, he stood up steadily and continued to climb forward. In the blink of an eye, Chimpingan squatted on a sloping locust tree branch, which was as high as the Tuzhanghai courtyard wall. After that, he held his breath and squinted his eyes, not in any rush to sneak in. On the way, he and Yao returned to the town from the covered bridge. Chimpingan asked many questions. For example, the old ape in Zhengyang Mountain, on the boundary of the small town. How fast can he run, and how high can he jump under normal circumstances? How tough is his body? What kind of copper skin and iron bones? If I punched it, it would be tantamount to scratching the old ape. How much damage would it cause at a distance of and per steps if it were replaced by a slingshot or a wooden bow? Are there any fatal flaws in the so-called immortals of the old ape of Zhengyang Mountain, such as eyeballs, crotch, and throat? If it is said that the opponent is injured and has to kill with all his strength, will I be sure to die? At that time, Ning Yao was almost asked by the teenager that he only hated that he was not deaf and mute. According to the girl in black, whether it is a chi refiner or a pure martial artist, the more advanced the practitioner is, the greater the pressure on the place. It is absolutely supported, and once it opens, it will suffer the general damage of seawater backflow. Just imagine facing the rapid flood, and then you try to open a small hole in the embankment. But in the end, Ning Yao's conclusion is that if the young man and the Zhengyang Mountain old ape fight against each other, Chimpingan has no chance of winning. In Huaiyin, the young man's eyes were firm, his face was indifferent, and he said silently, "Don't let the old ape approach within 10 steps. 10 steps. At least open this distance." Ning Yao said that as long as the old ape doesn't jump over the wall, there is a chance to survive. But Chimpingan replied that he wanted to force the old ape to kill him, otherwise it would be meaningless. The old ape in Zhengyang Mountain must be forced to get angry and let the old ape not hesitate to use his infuriating energy in order to really destroy the cultivation base he has accumulated over the past 1,000 years. Life is worthless at all. But Chimpingan really wants to know if the old ape will feel distressed when he sees those vanishing practices, and whether it is worth it. Of course, the premise of everything is that you don't want to be punched to death by someone. The young man looked down at the people in the mansion passing through the corridor, and muttered, "Even if you can't escape, you must take a few more punches." Chimpingan never thought that he could kill the old ape, let alone that he could survive. The Lee family mansion. the little girl from Zhengyang Mountain, as the granddaughter of the ancestor of the Tao family, was enshrined by the Li family as a bodhisattva. In addition to arranging a number of first and second class maids in the other courtyard, a girl who has children in her family has clean hands and feet. The most important thing is to know her roots and backgrounds. She has a clean background and may have been loyal to the Li family since her ancestors. This courtyard is located in the middle, not close to the street of Fulu Street. The little girl's name is Tao Zi, and her nickname is Tao Zi. She is the pistachio of the ancestors of the Sword Immortals in Zhengyang Mountain. Of course, it is not because of her innocent and lovely temperament, but her future kendo level, which is qualified to let Zhengyang Mountain not hesitate, costly smashing into massive resources. Since 500 years, Tao Zi's 4 things, namely, the root, talent, temperament, and chance, are among the best among the ancestors of the major peaks of Zhengyang Mountain in the past. To put it simply, the little girl, Tao Zi, will be a longboard. It is very long. But there is no shortboard magical existence. This is truly a once in a century, not a polite compliment from a bad street. The little girl is now without the old ape by her side. She is alone in a completely unfamiliar place. She is not afraid of life or stage fright. Walk up a mountain? This made the little girl very disheartened. Sister Su of Zhengyang Mountain, when she entered the Middle 5 Realms, was given a mountain as a gift by her ancestors and became Sister Su's private domain. That mountain is Grandpa Ape, thousands of miles away, personally carried it back to Zhengyang Mountain and placed it in the northeast of Zhengyang Mountain. Although it was not big, the little girl had always been envious. She felt a little stuffy in the study, so she walked to the main hall, put her hands together, and looked up at the plaque for a long time. The little girl was always followed closely behind by 2 beautiful maids. One of them was discovered by the Li family as a child, and he was trained to become a martial artist with a small achievement. In fact, for the Li family, this kind of behavior is no different from raising flowers, birds, fish, and worms. But it is not the hope that the girl can become a martial arts master in the future. Within the high wall of the big family, it is not impossible for the slaves to bully the masters. Not to mention the fact that Shengmian fights rice enemies. The vision of the slaves and servants is too high, and the potential is too great. It may not be a good thing for the inheritance of the next generation of the family. The little girl walked to the gate and bounced around in the yard. She didn't leave the yard without permission to make people embarrassed. Grandpa Ape reminded her that the people from Fenglei Yuan had also arrived in the town, and she should not leave the yard until he settled it. Although the little girl is young, she has been fascinated by the treacherous clouds and dangers she has cultivated on the mountain since she was a child, and her family education is extremely strict, so she is not the kind of stubborn child who makes the elders worry. The bored little girl ended up lying on the stone table, and there was a bird cage on the table, which contained a bird that looked like a snake catcher, with its head down, sickly, with gray feathers. Not at all. It's good looking. No matter how much the little girl teased her before, this snake eagle didn't pay attention to her, so she also found it boring and boring. Now she really has nothing to do, so she whistled at the flat-haired animal. Inside the cage are 2 porcelain bird food jars made privately by Li Jialong Kiln, which are small and exquisite. One for plain and elegant water, and the other for bright food. It's just that after the snake eagle was caught, it didn't touch any water or grains of rice. It's been almost 2 days. In small towns, snake eagles are rarely caught, and occasionally, whether they are young chicks or adult snake eagles, they die of hunger strike without exception, no matter how you can feed it, let alone become a falcon driven by humans. The little girl who was whistling saw that the snake eagle was still unresponsive, and finally lost her patience, stood up, turned around and left. A bang! A bird food jar inside the cage shattered violently. The little girl first appeared sluggish for a moment, and then almost instinctively pulled a tall maid and let her stand in front of her. The tall and plump maid only felt that her wrists were tightly bound by iron wires, and she almost screamed in pain. It was the shorter maid, with sharp eyes, who immediately stood in front of the little girl and quickly looked around. The second bird food jar in the cage exploded again, and the sound of firecrackers sounded on the table. There are assassins on the roof over the Qingshan courtyard. The maid who had practiced martial arts finally caught the figure. This time, on the roof ridge of the next courtyard, there was a half-squatting figure. The maid started to run. The wall of the other courtyard was not high. She stepped on it, grabbed the edge of the wall with both hands, and quickly climbed up to the top of the wall with her outstanding physical strength. For a while, she was in trouble. This other courtyard was not far from Qingshan, but the assassin was located on the roof of the main house of Qingshan, and Qingshan was close to Fulu Street, so that person could easily climb over the wall. So she made a decision almost between lightning and flint. Instead of jumping off the wall and running to the Qingshan courtyard, she ran along the wall and jumped onto the ridge of her own courtyard. During this period, the maid always kept an eye out for the assassin's sneak attack. Strangely, the assassin neither hindered her footsteps, nor did she intend to retreat immediately. Between the eaves of the 2 courtyards, there is about a distance of our feet. While staring at the movement of the assassin, the maid retreated quietly on the eaves, and finally took a deep breath and prepared to run. The maid was shocked. The assassin who confronted her from a distance was actually a skinny teenager in shabby clothes. The teenager had 2 small bags tied around his waist, and he couldn't see the murder weapon in his hand. It should have been hidden. The maid thought it was the most likely slingshot. She is also very puzzled. If she hit her head, she would not dare to say that she would be killed on the spot. But she was definitely not seriously injured. With the almost terrifying head of a teenager, she deliberately smashed the bird food jar twice, and she really missed herself or the other, a little girl from Jiangyang Mountain. In the yard, the little girl said angrily. Idiot. Be careful with the trick. Come back quickly. It is of course important to capture an assassin and extort a confession by severe torture, but it is even more important to prevent an accident and save one's life. After the little girl released the arm of the tall maid, she raised her palm and slapped the frightened girl awake. And you, hurry up and report. Do you know that if I die, your house, all of them are going to die? The maid on the roof did not jump into the hospital immediately, but shouted loudly, There are assassins. Then she began to run wildly, jumping off the edge of the eaves. And then the whole person began to leap towards the ridge of Qingshan Court opposite, relying on the maid's series of climbing and running movements. The assassin boy, who roughly judged her arm strength, leg strength, and vigor, squatted down and picked up 2 tiles, and threw his right hand, just hitting the girl's forehead. The girl, who was still in the air, subconsciously had both arms. He staggered and blocked in front of his head, and then slammed it twice, causing the maid to pierce her bones. The force was far beyond what the maid imagined. The whole person rushed forward and was immediately blocked. Just when she regretted her bravery on the occasion, the maid, who had barely landed on the opposite eaves, was hit in the stomach with a punch, causing her to fall backwards. It was just that the assassin grabbed an ankle inexplicably, and after a slight pause, the young man released his hand. The maid didn't land safely, but she was not seriously injured. Her whole head was a mess. Out of the corner of the boy's eyes, he has been looking at the surrounding situation, and after finding black spots around him, he starts to turn around and run away. The speed is fast, the pace is large, the rhythm is good, especially with the right breathing and breathing if the maid can see it. She will definitely feel that the young man is like her, who has practiced martial arts for many years and has been immersed in it for a long time. Definitely not what a layman. The boy on the roof ridge soon disappeared, like a light bird, a snake eagle out of its cage, after about a stick of incense. The burly old man hurried back to the Li family mansion. Murderous. From Li Hong, the head of the Li family, to the maids in other courtyards. Everyone dared not breathe, especially the maid who practiced martial arts, kneeling on the ground. Her cheeks were red and swollen. The maid did not say a word, and did not dare to show any resentment. The little girl, who was already calm as usual, sighed when she saw the old man, shook her head and said, Grandpa Ape, the people of the Li family seem to be all trash. How dare you entrust me to them? Moving Mountain Ape knelt down on one knee, still taller than the little girl. The white-haired old man said, Guilty. Miss, it's the old slave's fault. The old man turned his head and said solemnly, Li Hong, the owner of the small-town Li family, has a rough understanding of the orthodox and elegant words of Dongbao Pingzhou. It happened that the words of the Jiangyang Mountain cultivator were exactly the same. This man in the family has no choice but to smile and apologize. This time it is indeed my Li family's. The fault cannot be excused. According to the current situation we have obtained, it is a young man, most of whom are not practitioners. The government office has not provided any useful information for the time being, but only said that it will send more competent people to guard the house day and night. Taozi thought for a while and said, That assassin doesn't look like he's here to kill me. Then he added, At least not today. Patriarch Li's heart was about to fall, and it immediately hung back in his throat. Bai Yuan frowned and asked, Is that young man thin, dark-skinned, and about this height? Well, and wearing straw sandals. The maid who was kneeling on the ground nodded vigorously. Bai Yuan grinned, his eyes gloomy. Good guy. It turned out to be a demonstration and provocation. He waved his hand and said, Don't interfere in this matter. I know the details of the assassin. He's an ordinary teenager in Mud Bottle Alley. The little girl whispered, Grandpa Ape, don't take it lightly. The mover hesitated for a while, then stood up and instructed the Li family's owner. Then let the government office take out a household file to the Li family's house and check the details of the 18th generation of the boy's ancestors. And then in terms of manpower guarding this yard, it is easy to be skilled and less, and it is not easy to be complicated and more. The old man quietly accentuated his tone and sneered. Li Hong, I advise you to invite the Dinghai Shenzhen that your family sits here. Don't take things seriously. My young lady really wants to have 3 strengths and 2 weaknesses here. Even me. In your eyes. The old beast can't handle it. Can you? Li's partial support. The head of the Li family hurriedly apologized and said in a panic, Patriarch Ape is ruining the Li family. The mountain protector of Jiangyang Mountain fell into contemplation and murmured, Is the boy from Feng Liyuan taking the opportunity to provoke him? Or is it the plan of Song Changjing of the government office? The old man finally shook his head, thinking it was ridiculous. No matter who instigated him to die, you don't know how to find a better pond to cross the river. A little grasshopper with only a few ounces of meat stuck between his teeth. It's good. I don't have a chance to kill people. This is a good reason. First kill the soil embryo in the Mud Bottle Alley, and then clean up your little bastard in Feng Liyuan. The old man smiled at the little girl and said, Miss, this old slave will definitely help you clean up the mess this time, and there will never be another accident. The little girl smiled brightly and raised her fist to boost the morale of the guarding ape of Jiangyang Mountain. Before the old man left, he looked at the head of the Li family, and the latter smiled bitterly. I'm going to invite my ancestors to come out and serve as a personal squire for Miss Tao in person." The old man nodded and strode away. The old man bit the bait carelessly and went straight to Mud Bottle Alley along the fishing line. "It is clear that I have taken the bait. You can kill it, if it is outside the town. This Jungyang moving mountain ape would not dare to be so arrogant. But in this world, magical powers and magic weapons are all prohibited. But he has a huge advantage, which is why Jungyang Mountain did not dispatch one. The reason for the ancestor of Jiangxian." The old ape walked all the way and approached the Mud Bottle Alley. And the old ape realized that, isn't the boy in the alley just trying to avenge his friends? Before this, the old ape had been thinking deeply about the conspiracy that the grass and gray lines stretched thousands of miles. Now that he suddenly realizes this possibility, he finds it particularly absurd. The old ape smiled and quickly wanted to understand the reason. If that's the case, it makes sense. And yes, it's not a practitioner, but not so afraid of death. It's just a cheap life anyway. But to be careful, the old ape still did not swagger into the Mud Bottle Alley from this end. No matter what, this trip is destined to not go in vain. That little bastard who is highly valued by Feng Liuyuan is nothing more than a little longer than the little mudlegs in Mud Bottle Alley. After a long circle, the old ape walked into the Mud Bottle Alley from the corner of the alley near Gu Kan's house. In fact, the old ape was very suspicious of whether the assassin boy had the courage to stay in the ancestral house and wait for his death. If you were smart and timid, you could die after the young people in Feng Liuyuan. The old ape grinned. Then the smile instantly stiffened. In the Mud Bottle Alley at dusk, the path has become dark and blurry. The burly old man suddenly raised his head. For some reason, a thin young man just stood at a high place in front of the alley, with his feet on the holes that had just been dug in the walls on both sides, just to be able to take advantage of it. The young man carried a quiver on his back and held a fully drawn wooden bow. The tip of the arrow pointed directly at an eyeball of the old ape. The young man was completely silent, drawing his bow like a full moon without speaking, as if even the slightest breath seemed to have disappeared. So much so, that the mountain guardian of Jungyang Mountain could only detect the existence of the young man above his head with his keen sense of danger. Don't give the old ape more chances to react. The arrow shot at it, roaring into the wind, and the force was heavy. After the young man shot an arrow, he didn't make a second choice at all. He shrank his neck and quickly hung the wooden bow diagonally on his shoulders. He exerted force on his toes, and staggered on the walls on both sides to use force to move up the eaves, and it was fleeting. The old ape retracted the palm that was blocking his forehead, and saw that the arrow was nailed into the palm of his hand. Not deep, and it was vaguely visible that there was a wound. But the old ape was afraid for a while. If he was in the small town, he was shot in the eye with an arrow, and it would be a tragedy. Pull out the arrow at will, break it, and drop it in the Mud Bottle Alley. The old man clenched his fists and looked up at the sky in the alley. His face was ashen. His throat was agitated, and he made a low and suppressed sound, like an ancient beast that was extremely angry, using both hands and feet. The old man climbed to the roof in an instant, but as soon as he appeared, a second arrow rushed to him. The old man, who was already on guard, just lifted it up and let it be nailed into his arm a little bit, and strode forward with a grinning smile. The boy who put away the wooden bow again turned around and ran. Above the continuous eaves on the side of Mud Bottle Alley, there was a series of cracking sound. After all, the old man's stride was much larger than that of the young man, and he gradually narrowed the distance. No accident. He would soon catch up with the thin young man whose figure was actually flexible enough. The old man instantly exerted his strength, and the whole person rose into the air and slaughtered forward. A giant hand the size of a palm fan reached out to the young man's head. The young man seemed to have eyes behind him, but at the critical moment, he twisted his waist, his whole body bent, and then turned and jumped to the roof opposite the alley. After gently landing, continued to run wild. The old ape's movements were also extremely agile and swift, and he also folded abruptly to the roof on the other side of the Mud Bottle Alley on the right. The young man stopped suddenly. When the old ape realized that something was wrong, it was too late. It turned out that the roof was uninhabited, and it had been in disrepair for a long time, and it was already dilapidated. How could it bear the 200 jin jump of the old ape? Crash. People and tiles fell into the house together. The old ape fell to the ground with a bang, and after holding the ground with one hand, he twisted his head to avoid the tricky and insidious arrow. The arrow pierced directly into the ground. It can be seen that it is not that the youth is not strong enough, but the old ape is too rough and thick. The young man stood on the edge of the big hole in the roof, put away the wooden bow skillfully, raised his middle finger at the old ape, and scolded, "Old beast, fuck your mother." The young man suddenly looked strange, and suddenly slapped himself and muttered, "It's not that I'm at a loss." The old ape stood up suddenly, and the young man was gone again. Among the piles of broken rubble, the old ape's ears moved slightly, heard the slight movement, grinned, bent down and picked up a broken tile. After weighing it, he got up and slammed it out. The tile is like a knife cutting tofu. Easily pierced, the walls and roof smashed away with the sound of wind and thunder, and the tiles went to the place where the sound originated. It's a pity that the old ape didn't see the trace of the young man. With his toes a little, his burly body rose from the ground, stepped on an old house beam, and jumped out of the roof hole with the force of rebound. Landing on the roof ridge, the old ape saw a young man with a wooden bow standing far away. standing on the ridge of a roof, looking at the white-robed old ape with a solemn expression. The old ape also knew that he had miscalculated, so he just threw the tile and shot. The movement was too loud, and it was estimated that he had already stunned the snake, making the little mudleg of the mud bottle alley realize that it was not good, and completely lost the thought of relying on the distance advantage of the bow and arrow to take advantage. The old ape smiled and spread out his hands, indicating that he had nothing in his hands, and then stretched out his fingers to hook, indicating that the young man could continue to play fancy tricks. He was willing to accompany him to the end and continue to stretch his muscles and bones. If it is said that the old man is cheating, it is really unfair to this ape of Jungyang Mountain, who has cultivated for thousands of years and has a real body of thousands of feet. In the long years on the road of moving the mountain ape, especially in the early days of Jungyang Mountain's establishment of the mountain, the weak mountain gate, the enemies on all sides, and the tigers and wolves looked around. Have you ever experienced a bloody battle? Today's small fights on the roofs of the alleys is actually similar to the previous fights. It is that in those heart-pounding battles in those days, the top monks and great key refiners also used magic weapons to contain the old ape from a distance. He did not dare to fight head-on at all. Just like the Dachang light cavalry who came and went like the wind in the battlefield of the world. He would never directly put on the heavy armored soldiers of Dali, but cut the flesh with a quick knife and slowly, looking for it bit by bit, with an opportunity, slowly cut off the surface of the iron barrel battle formation. Today, the old ape can be regarded as one of the characters who are most suppressed by the heaven here, besides the vassal king Song Changjing. The military master who hangs the tiger talisman is favored by this world because of his special status, so although his cultivation is extremely good, the influence is not obvious. At this moment, in the face of a vigorous young man who is different from the ordinary people in the small town, the old ape actually found a trace of the pleasure of fighting with blood in the past. The old ape does not deny that the young man has given himself a lot of surprises. He can calculate people's hearts, he can set traps, and he can make use of the geographical advantage. Of course, the most important thing is that he is not small. The old ape looked up at the sky. The west sun was falling, and the twilight had arrived, and his vision would be more and more affected, and he is completely unfamiliar with the geographical situation of the small town, which is probably one of the young man's reliance. Soso can be regarded as a talisman. The old ape began to run wildly, like a galloping horse, and it was astounding to be able to step over a distance of more than 10 feet in one step. The young man turned around and ran as soon as the old ape set off, instead of going to the north along the endless alleys and alleys. After all, there are Fulu Street and Taoye Alley there. Qin Pingyuan did not feel that he had the ability to escape the encirclement and suppression. Therefore, Qin Pingyuan resolutely fled to the west, because the south-covered bridge has a wide field of vision and nowhere to hide. According to the comparison of the two's foot strength, Qin Pingyuan estimates that once he loses the barrier, it will be difficult to escape the pursuit of the mountain ape. Out of the town to the west, there are deep mountains and old forests, lush vegetation, and many hidden trails. There are also many traps under the hunters. The mountain road is difficult. If you don't follow the old road, it will be extremely difficult. Qin Pingyuan knows this better than anyone else. The young man was right, but he misestimated the old ape. It must be known that the old man, as the guardian ape of Jungyang Mountain, has a deeper understanding of mountains and rivers than the young man. When the boy jumped off the last roof and landed, he bent his knees, subtly relieved part of his falling force, quickly turned his head and glanced at the scene behind him, and continued to bow forward. While running, the wooden bow and quiver disappeared in the mountains and forests. Once Qin Pingyuan chooses to abandon the path that his ancestors stepped on and go frightened, then they will inevitably become a burden. Seeing that the young man was about to enter the water, the old ape felt a little irritable and looked back at the direction of the Li family's house on Fulu Street. In fact, once in the mountains, the old ape would not dare to say that he would take advantage of the land. The old ape made up his mind, quickly weighed the pros and cons, took a deep breath of fresh breath. No more, no less, if there was no big deviation, just enough to kill. I saw that the old ape's face was full of blue and purple ripples, and his burly figure suddenly rose to the ground without warning. The poor house under his feet was trampled by his foot, and most of it collapsed. Fortunately, it was in the west of the town. The people who live there are poor people, and the house is far thinner than the buildings on Fulu Street. For example, the wood used for the beams and pillars is not enough to look at. There are 4 people in the house, and luckily, none of them stayed in the house at this time. The old ape jumped high and drew a huge arc in the air. When he landed, it was just beside the young man, where his feet stood. 2 big pits appeared, and the soft spring mud splashed around. The old ape punched the boy's back vest on the back of a person. There are various yang meridians, so regardless of the meridians and viscera, they are all connected with the back, especially the back vest, which is really just a stone's throw away from the heart, is the most vulnerable, with life hanging by a thread. Hearing the movement next to him, the young man suddenly exerted his strength. Compared with the previous time when he lured the old ape to step on the rotten roof, his figure was even 2 or 3 points faster. This at least means that the young man has been hiding his strength from beginning to end. This made Lao Yuan's punch not only failed to pierce the boy's back vest, but also failed to smash a heart, but only wiped an inch of his back under the boy's back vest. Although he didn't take the punch hard, the boy was still hit by a big mallet. knocking his feet off the ground and flying out. In the next scene, the astonishing vigor and agility of the young man was vividly displayed. I saw the straw shoe boy, with blood oozing from the corner of his mouth. After a punch, he was supposed to throw a dog on the ground and eat shit. But the boy stretched out his hands and rested on the ground. With the force, the whole person flipped in the air in one go. And after landing on both feet, he continued to run away without slowing down by the inertia of the forward. Even a well-informed and experienced mountain-moving ape will inevitably have a toothache when he sees the tenacity of the young man in the small town. The old ape raised his hand. The blood on the back of his hand was blurred. This injury is nothing, and the old ape laughed it off. However, his will to kill the young man became more and more firm. As for why it was injured, it's not complicated. It was cold in the spring. The boy in the back street who was originally thinly dressed, when he appeared in front of the old ape today, obviously had to wear much thicker clothes. In addition to his own clothes, he also found a large old clothes of Liu Xianyang, a tall boy, and put it on the outermost side. Between the clothes, there is another mystery. It turned out that the young man made a wooden porcelain armor for himself. 6 long cooked wooden boards were drilled and tied together with silk ropes. There were 3 pieces on the chest and 3 pieces on the back. On the wooden armor, inlaid with densely packed small broken pieces of porcelain. The old ape felt very bad at this time, like a dignitary who accidentally stepped on a piece of stinky shit, and it was difficult to get rid of it for a while. The old ape clenched his fist tightly, held his breath, stood on the spot, and forced the surging and majestic chi in his body to turn over. His face turned purple and blue, and the ripples turned purple and gold, and disappeared in a flash. The old ape was furious. It turned out that, at that moment, a pebble shot out from the woods. The old ape reached out to hold a particularly hard stone, the size of a fingernail. Then there was a rustling sound, indicating that the boy was fleeing to the depths. The old ape's face was extremely gloomy, turning to look at the town at night. I'm afraid that this is the other party's real trick. But intuition told the old ape that it was best to kill the boy with straw sandals quickly in the mountains. The tree of Huaisenhui on Fulu Street, which had just been climbed by a young assassin before, is the tallest branch that can bear the weight of a person. It is located much higher than the roof, and there is an uninvited guest sitting a little further down, still standing. One person? The sudden appearance of these 2 people made the Li family's house, who was in a state of turmoil, have to pinch his nose and pretend not to see, because the man in white robe sitting there was the superintendent. He brought Song Jiksen to Descendants Hui, saying that he wanted to show him a good show. It's just that it was already the end of the evening, and Song Jiksen didn't have enough eyesight, so he could only listen to Song Changjing tell him about the ridiculous chase that started on the roof of Mud Bottle Alley. The man propped his knees with one hand and his cheeks with the other, looking into the distance, in the gap between the chasing and killing process, some unknown small town secrets, or some arbitrary cultivation insights will be interspersed from time to time. If you don't talk about chance, just talk about the real magic weapon. The famous sword scripture that has been rumored for a long time can be ranked among the top 3 in the town at the moment. It is estimated that the top 10 is a little bit hanging, but the top 20 is definitely no problem. Don't think this ranking is low. It is actually very high, in addition to the wart armor. If the little guy surnamed Lu can digest this, in this king's view, his chances are not worse than the 5 of you. Song Jiksen didn't look up, because a guy directly hung his feet on the top of the boy's head. And the boy asked curiously, then why was he beaten to death by the old ape of Zhengyang Mountain? Song Changjing smiled indifferently and said, I'm so lucky. I'm jealous, and I don't have a backer. Is it difficult to understand? Song Jiksen was puzzled and asked, then you were in Mud Bottle Alley. Why didn't you win over more thoroughly? The king of Dali, who was on top of the boy's head, laughed, extremely happy, and laughed for a long time before saying, this king is about the cultivation geniuses on the mountain. In short, after you go out, if you hear about this king's nickname, you will understand the reason for that. Song Changjing suddenly stood up, looked into the distance. His expression changed slightly. One hand gently rubbed the jade belt around his waist. His eyes were hot. In the eyes of this great master of martial art, who is close to I am the peak of the mountain, in the westernmost part of the town, with the breaking of the rules of the mountain-moving monkey, the key movement was turbulent in an instant, so that the atmosphere in that area was chaotic, like broken china that explodes and splashes. Song Changjing said slowly, you may be very strange. Why those outsiders have a look that looks at others like ants? Do you really think this is just their natural conceit? Eyes are in the sky. Personality is a small part of the reason. More of it is, as the general trend is. You have never walked out of the town, and you do not know the detached status of these immortal masters in the outer world. Song Jiksen replied, I'm not surprised at all. It's exhausting to talk to someone who's read. Song Changjing was not surprised, and continued to say to himself, because there is a line between you and them, this line is not too big. For some people, it is worse than Xiao Shuigu, as long as you encounter it. You will, those who can pass by, like you and Liu Xianying before, and Zhao Yao. The reading seed who was favored by the Taoists in Biezhou are all in this list, but it is not small. Most people in the town. Watching that line is like facing a moat, and there is no desire to cross the past. The 2 groups of people separated by that line have a huge gap. In fact, it's like people and plants. It's no different from the gap between yin and yang, and it's even bigger. When he said this, the Dali Domain King suddenly snorted, a little surprised, and then smiled gloatingly. That old beast is a little unlucky this time, but he got into such a small hedgehog, and it is very hidden. Song gathering salary. This king understands you a little bit now. It would be uncomfortable for anyone to stand up against such an opponent. Except for a clean punch to death, it is really a disgusting trouble. Song Jiksen looked unhappy. Not far from the Lee family mansion, the shouts were loud, and the Ding Hai Shenzhen in the dark shot angrily. The straw shoe boy really responded with a helping hand, and not ordinary people. Song Changjing smiled. Even if the assassin figure flashed past his descendants, why? The vassal king had no intention of stopping him. In the field of vision, the burly figure of the old ape strode back from the west, constantly rising and falling in the town. As for whether it will trample down the house when it hits the ground, will it damage the layout of other people's courtyards? Don't care. That Zhengyang mountain old ape seems to have identified a punching bag. Song Changjing suddenly frowned, then relieved, and then there was an instant burst of fighting spirit. Song Changjing, the great Li Wufu, likes 3 things in this life: building the Jingguan, killing geniuses, and war gods. The next moment, Song Jiksen's eyes widened, and he didn't know when the man above his head had already landed on Fulu Street and collided with the burly old man who was flying from a distance. The king of Dali, the old ape who moved mountains. 1 person and 1 punch exchanged. Hitting their respective chests, Song Changjing did not retreat, but took a step forward, while the old ape took a step back. They punched each other again, this time between their foreheads and brows. Song Changjing strode forward. This time only he punched. Step forward and step heavily on the ground. Squat with both knees. Stretch your left hand forward and clench your right hand to retreat. This man was dressed in a long snow-white robe. His sleeves were swaying, and there were cracked bluestone slabs under his feet. Straight punch. The old ape had to stretch out a palm to block Song Changjing's fist. Between heaven and earth, there seems to be a faint sound of 2 cracks. The old ape slipped out more than 10 feet, and a shocking gully was plowed out of the bluestone floor. Song Changjing waved his sleeves lightly, holding one hand behind him, holding the white jade belt around his waist with the other, and said with a smile, Qi Jingchun, don't you come forward to stop it. Are you really going to break the jar? Don't. Just hold on for a while longer. The old ape let out a sigh of relief. Song Changjing raised a palm, shook it with a smile, and said, wait for this king to go out before I fight. Now I'll do my best. The old ape grinned. Song Changjing, then you'd better be able to defeat me at that time. Otherwise, the southern frontier army of Dali will not feel very well. Song Changjing smiled and said, as you wish. The old ape snorted coldly and entered the Li family mansion alone. The young lady was safe and sound. Not even a shock. After learning about the details, the old ape found that it was just a clumsy trick. After thinking for a while, he smirked and rushed to the west of the town, into the mountains to hunt. In the night, when Chen Ping'an fled to the deep mountains and ran wild, it didn't take long for him to run into a bamboo forest where the soil was extraordinarily soft. After about half a stick of incense, about to run out of the edge of the bamboo forest, the young man suddenly climbed on a bamboo on his left and swayed to another bamboo not far away. After several times, he finally landed lightly, squatted down and wiped his footprints with his hands, turned his head to look, and was 5 or 6 feet away from the first bamboo, and the young man began to run, in less than a stick of incense. The sound of the stream could be faintly heard. The boy who was running wildly not only did not stop, but jumped up and fell into the stream. Soon the boy stood up. It turned out that he fell on the ground, on top of a boulder. The young man, who was very familiar with the landscape of this land, tried his best to keep his eyes open. With his extraordinary eyesight and outstanding memory, he jumped on the stones in the stream and fled all the way downstream. If you go on like this, you can reach Qingyu Bay by the stream in the south of the town, then the covered bridge, and finally the blacksmith shop of Master Ruan. However, the young man did not get too close to Qingyu's back, but after the creek came out of the mountain, it suddenly tucked into the narrowest part of a woman's waist and went to the right bank here. Soon the woman was heard softly shouting, Chen Ping'an, this way. Chen Ping'an quickly squatted down, panting, and reached out to wipe the sweat from his forehead. The girl in black asked in a low voice, can you really deceive the old ape into the mountain? The boy said bitterly, I tried my best. It was Ning Yao, who also made a detour from Fulu Street in the small town to meet up. She asked, are you injured? The straw shoe boy shook his head and said, small injury. The girl was in a complicated mood and said angrily, dare to play like this. The old ape didn't kill you. It's your shit luck. Chen Ping'an grinned and said, the old beast has broken the rules once, but if you take action a little later, I guess it will hang. The girl was stunned for a while, and then said cheerfully, is it true? Yes, Chen Ping'an. Chen Ping'an laughed. Ning Yao rolled his eyes and asked, next. The straw shoe boy thought for a while. The general direction we set before remains unchanged, but the details of some places have to be changed. The old ape is too powerful. Ning Yao slapped the straw shoe boy on the head with a slap and said with an angry smile, you just know. Chen Ping'an suddenly said, Miss Ning, turn around. I'm going to apply some herbs to my back. By the way, help me look over the stream. The girl turned around generously, facing the upstream of the stream. Chen Ping'an took off the shirt that originally belonged to Liu Shunyang, took off the wooden porcelain armor, took out the porcelain bottle of Yang shot from a cloth bag around his waist, poured out some thick ointment, poured it into the palm of his right hand, and poured it into the palm of his left hand. Lift the shirt and apply the right hand to the back. The boy, who was very able to bear the pain, could not help but break into a cold sweat. Although the girl did not turn around, she still asked, "Does it hurt?" The boy smiled and said, "What is this?" The girl pouted. "How strong is this?" In the house in the westernmost part of the town, a woman was sitting on the ground crying, slapping her breasts, shaking, and her thin clothes showed signs of bursting at any time. Standing beside my mother, there was a simple and honest man squatting outside the house, sighing, his face full of helplessness. There was an inexplicable hole in the roof. The coldness of the spring had not yet subsided, and his body was able to endure it. But then his mother-in-law and cubs, "How are you doing?" Neighbors not far from the neighborhood gathered and pointed. Some people said that they had heard noises on their roofs before. Some people also say that the west side of the town is not very peaceful. It seems that a child sees an old immortal in white clothes floating around, and he can take a dozen steps as a commoner in one step. And he can also fly over the eaves and walls, running out of the ancestral hall. It was the mountain god who came out of the mountain. There was a young Jiang Qiu and Feng Leiyuan squatting alone, his face heavy. Before Liu Baqiao was chatting with Mr. Kui at the superintendent's office. After hearing about the movement of the Li family's mansion, he smelled the fishy smell. But this handsome man of Feng Leiyuan, no matter how conceited, did not dare to come to the door and provoke a mountain ape. Is wondering if we can watch the fire from the other side. If there is a chance to smack the old ape, it will be even more pleasing. So Liu Baqiao touched the eaves of a large mansion and looked down on the town, looking for the old ape's movement. He soon found out that there was a strange movement on the side of Naiping Lane in the west of the city. So Liu Baqiao, who was daring by nature, quietly stalking. At the moment when the guardian ape of Zhenyang Mountain did not hesitate to run the chi machine, after Liu Baqiao was injured, the flying sword of his life, which had to be moved and kept in the Mingtang aperture, was about to move and was almost unsheathed. Because in this strange world, the level of cultivation is directly proportional to the pressure of heaven's Tao. According to Liu Baqiao's estimation, protecting the mountain ape is not easy, even if he can forcibly change his breath and use his strong physique or supernatural power afterwards. He come over to suppress the boiling of the sea of qi caused by the Tao of heaven. But the number of times of this kind of cheating will never be too much. Otherwise, you will have to bear the huge risk of floods bursting the embankment. Taking a step back, every time you take a shot as a fairy outside of Fengtiandi, it is already a kind of loss. In fact, it is equivalent to the loss of life of the lady in the world. But when Liu Baqiao saw the landing place after the old ape stepped on the roof, the two big pits where he stood, the Feng Leiyuan Kendo genius began to rejoice that he did not act rashly. Otherwise, he would get caught on fire. The depth of the fresh air machine? If you hadn't discovered the movement of the Li family mansion on Fulu Street, you had to determine the safety of the little girl in Zhenyang Mountain and hunt down that cunning fox-like boy with straw sandals. Killing yourself, Liu Baqiao, is definitely a one-shot kill. Of course, the old ape was neither blind nor a fool. When his life was about to come out, the mountain protector must have noticed his existence. It's just that Liu Baqiao wandered around the Ghost Gate, and he was afraid of returning home. But he was not afraid of the existence of the old ape, Fenglai Garden, and Zhengyang Mountain. No matter how different the strength of the two sides is, it's okay not to make a move. Once one side chooses, if you make a move, you are in a state of immortality, and people with low cultivation will never kowtow to their opponents to beg for mercy. This is a fact that has been proved by countless lives in the two holy places of swordsmanship in East Aquarius Island for 500 years. What's more, Liu Baqiao is not without his back in the town. Liu Baqiao stood up slowly, did not go straight back to the Yaye office, but walked to the dilapidated house in the far west, stood outside the low yellow mud wall, and gave a hard feat before both the man and his wife turned to look at him. After that, he threw out a gold fine copper coin and threw it to the woman with pear blossoms and rain, and said with a smile, "Eldest sister, please stop howling. I'm panicking from such a distance." The woman took the golden copper coin and glanced down at the patter. It was similar to the copper coin, except that the color was different. She was a little sluggish and asked in a low voice, "Gold." Liu Baqiao laughed and said, "No, but it's worth more than gold." The woman was stunned for a moment, then furious, and slammed the golden copper coin at the young man from the Outlander, stood up, put her hips on her hips and cursed, "Go away. I still believe that it is gold, and it is worth more than gold. Are you an old lady? Have you seen the world? My mother is also a person who has no money in her own hands. A little bastard with no hair, who doesn't pick up the little loach in his crotch, dares to come to my mother's place to pretend to be an uncle. My man is not dead yet. Woolen cloth." Speaking of which, the woman became even more angry, and walked quickly. Her sturdy waist, which was not much slender than a bucket, could be twisted into a unique style by her. The kick made him fall to the ground, and the man didn't say anything about fighting back, but he didn't dare to fight back. The woman pointed at her own man and scolded. The unpromising bastard is no different from death. When something happens, he knows to pretend to be dead, and he knows how to wander around all day long, fishing for fish and snakes, similar to a child wearing open crotch pants, better than your son. It's not as good. Zhao Huai knows how to steal, pick up something to go home. You are a father. Why is the guy in the Yang family shop unwilling to do it? I don't know what to do. Speaking of this, a woman whose breasts were worthy of the word spectacular suddenly smiled. If it weren't for the fact that I was able to toss people at night, my mother would be happy to live with you. Neighbors who were watching the theater laughed in an uproar, and there were also young men whistling and talking dirty. The woman finally pointed her finger at the culprit again and shouted, I haven't gotten out yet. Haven't weaned yet? Where has Liu Baqiao ever seen such a rustic atmosphere? Not only did he not find it vulgar, but he found it quite interesting. The excitement was entertaining. Even though he was scolded by the woman, he laughed instead of being angry. After every quarrel, there will be a kind of loneliness. I feel that I have good martial arts skills, but I have no equal opponents. I never thought that today I will finally have a role to play. What? The woman raised her brows and sneered. I'm afraid I'll accidentally suffocate you to death. You can go to Granny Ma in Xinghua Lane. Take care of yourself. Suddenly laughter broke out. Although Liu Baqiao didn't know how holy Granny Ma was, but from the reactions of the audience around him, he could tell that his battle was a disastrous defeat. The young Jiangxu stretched out his thumb and smiled brightly. Eldest sister, you are ruthless. Then he clamped the gold and copper coin between his fingers and shook it. Really not. The woman was obviously hesitant. At this moment, someone in the distance shouted helplessly, Baqiao, Mr. Kui told you to hurry back. Liu Baqiao heard the sound and turned his head to look. It was Chen Songfeng, a son of the Chen clan in Longwei County. Standing beside him was a tall and stern woman with empty hands and no weapons. Long legs, very much to Liu Baqiao's appetite. She is Chen Songfeng's distant relative. As for how far away, Chen Songfeng has not taken the initiative to mention it. The woman has always called a Chen Songfeng by her first name, is a bit colder by nature. Since it was Kui Minghuang who spoke, Liu Baqiao didn't dare to wait any longer, so he followed the two to Fulu Street. But when he left, he subconsciously glanced at the frowning middle-aged man, a sloppy man among the crowd, hesitated for a moment, and walked to the yard alone after the neighbors dispersed one after another. The woman was about to take the pair of children to live with her parents, and she was really reluctant. Her parents were all snobbish and looked down on the man she picked. So in addition to the New Year's and festivals, there are very few contacts. But this kind of accident, the woman really can't do anything. She wants to be tough and take her son and daughter to the hotel and restaurant for a few days to be a rich wife, but she has no choice but to be shy and poor. I couldn't make it sound, so I had to shamelessly go back to my parents' house and get slapped at me. So the woman who thought about it more and more became annoyed before she left and twisted her man's waist fiercely until the man's whole face was crooked. Don't worry about parents quarreling. And try to secretly laugh. With sharp eyes, the woman saw the sloppy man hiding at the door, and she immediately scolded. The surnamed Zheng is here to take the old lady's clothes and pants again, no matter how unwilling the old lady is to admit it. After all, she has suffered from bad luck for 8 lifetimes. It's your sister-in-law. How could you be able to steal? The sloppy man wanted to cry but had no tears, and he wanted to die. Sister-in-law, the conscience of the world. I just forgot to buy candy for your little Why. So he said that on purpose. Sister-in-law, why do you really believe it? The little boy looked innocent. Of course, the woman believed in her own child more, and when she raised her hand, she would slap the man with a slap. The latter hurriedly shrank his neck and ran to the side, shouting to the man squatting on the ground, Senior brother, don't you persuade my sister-in-law? The man hurriedly said, I don't dare to persuade. The sloppy man lamented, this world can't let honest people mess with it. Holding a child in one hand, the woman walked to the courtyard gate, suddenly turned her head and lost a wink, and said with a smile, the surname is Zheng. Bring more money next time. My sister-in-law will sell it to you, and you will only charge 50 cents for one piece. How's it going? The sloppy man's eyes lit up, and he said timidly, a little more expensive. The new clothes from the shop in Xinghua Alley are of the best quality, so that's the price. The woman turned her face faster than a book and scolded, how dare you have such a bad mind? Go to hell. You deserve to be a bachelor for the rest of your life. It's a bad life, and one day you die outside the East Gate, and no one will collect your body for you. After the woman and the children left, the sloppy man jumped back gently, sat on the courtyard wall, and said angrily, Senior brother, it's not me who told you. You are really blinded by lard, and you chose such a savage girl. Let's be wives. It turned out that this sloppy guy was the janitor at the east gate of the town. His surname was Zheng, and he was a bachelor. The simple and honest man, who was still squatting on the ground in the yard, said, I'm happy. The town janitor, who was in charge of collecting money from outsiders, after a moment of silence, said, Master, the old man told you to be patient in the near future, and don't do anything with others. The janitor looked up at the poor roof and suddenly laughed. Master also said, if you really can't take it anymore, you should vent your anger on your wife. Anyway, my sister-in-law is not afraid of your troubles, so she just likes it. The man who couldn't make a fart even with 10 sticks raised his head and looked at the sloppy man on the low wall. The latter quickly changed his mouth and said, Well, it was me, Zheng Dafeng, who said it. Master never said such a thing. The simple and honest man stood up, with a short stature, bronze skin, bulging muscles in his arm, and stretching his sleeves so much he was still a little hunched, and said angrily to the town janitor, "Master is willing to tell you more than 10 words, and my surname is yours." The gatekeeper silently recited Master's advice in his heart, and then he did the math with his wrench, and there were really less than 10 words. This sloppy man first scolded a mother, and then was very discouraged, a little sad, but it was an unprecedented reveal of his true feelings, so he seemed especially pitiful. The rickety man asked, "Is there anything else?" The gatekeeper nodded and said, "Master said that you should deal with that person." The rickety man frowned, and then habitually squatted down, facing the destroyed house, and muttered, "Why?" The gatekeeper Zheng Dafeng rolled his eyes and said, "Anyway, it's what Master told you. Do you like it or not?" The man thought for a while. "Go away. If I see you stealing something from your sister-in-law next time, I will break your 3 legs." The sloppy man Zheng Dafeng angrily said, "Liar, you tell me clearly. Who stole your mother-in-law's clothes? Do you believe this kind of bastard? Are you thinking about it?" The man turned his head and looked at the irritable and angry fellow Junior and Junior with a dark face and silent. Zheng Dafeng, like a resentful little girl who has been wronged, said with grief and indignation, "I will never dare again." "Okay." The janitor stood up, his toes a little like a locust leaf floating into the street, and when he was far away, he dared to scold, "Liar, I will find my sister-in-law to buy her underwear." The sloppy man ran faster than a dog while talking harshly. It's just that the simple and honest man didn't mean to get up at all, and spit out a word. "Wow." The 3 returned to the office. The Confucian gentleman of the Guanhu Academy, Kui Minghuang, sat in the main hall and waited for a long time. After seeing the strange woman, Kui Minghuang stood up and nodded in greeting. The woman nodded too, her face still cold. In Liu Baqiao's private words, it is an expression that the whole world owes her a lot of money. After the 3 of them were seated, Kui Minghuang smiled at Liu Baqiao and said, "It's fortunate that you held back and didn't take action, or else you'd definitely get a big punch. Didn't you see that just now we supervised the officer song and that Zhengyang, the mountain protects the mountain monkey?" And the 3 punches were head-to-head on Fulu Street, and the movement was not small. To be honest, no matter what kind of opportunity you encounter next, I advise you not to shoot, and don't think there is an opportunity. Liu Baqiao asked curiously, "Could it be that the old beast turned over Song Changjing with 3 punches? Song Changjing embroidered pillows like this is not helpful. Didn't they all say that he touched the threshold of the 10th realm, and he was only half a step away from stepping in with 1 foot? That realm," Kui Minghuang said helplessly. "We're gonna live here with Master Song." "Can you be more polite?" Chen Songfeng said with emotion. "Master Song has some advantages, even if you can't fight against the Dali Domain King. As long as you are a practitioner, after hearing about this feat, you can't help but be fascinated by it. A pure martial artist. He only used his physical body and a mountain-moving ape to carry it to the end. The key is that this person can still have the upper hand." The woman sat on the side with her eyes closed and her hands resting on her knees. Hearing this, his fingers moved slightly. She was also hurriedly found by Chen Songfeng. She originally planned to hang out in the town, the reason why she did not insist on insisting, but followed Chen Songfeng to find Liu Baqiao, and then returned to the government office. She just followed the local customs. As for whether Chen Songfeng could obtain cheap benefits from the old locust tree, and if he could get a few ancestral locust leaves, the woman with the same surname as Chen did not care. However, when Chen Songfeng found her, she could still clearly feel that the young man's deliberately suppressed excitement was mostly fruitful. Liu Baqiao suddenly burst into laughter. The old bastard had a big somersault this time, and he was so happy that he was led by an ordinary teenager to walk a dog and play a monkey, and was led by the nose to walk half a town. Ha ha! This is a big joke. Enough for me to talk about it in Fenglai Garden for 10 years. At that time, with the temperament of the gang of turtles in Zhengyang Mountain, I will definitely jump out and say, "These are the blood of our Fenglai Garden, and we have the ability to show evidence. I will take it. Your uncle's evidence, if it weren't for the ban on spells in the town. The price of breaking the rules would be too high, or I would rubber this scene into the sound mirror in its entirety." Kui Minghuang suddenly changed his face slightly, and shouted to Liu Baqiao, "Baqiao?" The woman opened her eyes almost simultaneously. Liu Baqiao was about to ask what he was doing when he suddenly closed his mouth. Soon a white-robed man approached slowly, and after crossing the threshold, he asked Liu Baqiao with a smile, "What's so funny? It's better to be happy alone than everyone else. Why not let this king be happy too?" Kui Minghuang had already stood up and was about to speak, meaning to give the chair to the king of Dali. Song Changjing smiled and shook his head at the scholar from Guanhu Academy, indicating that there was no need for such red tape. Although Liu Baqiao gives the impression of being lazy, but at such a close distance, facing a warrior who is very likely to enter the 10th realm of legends. Especially this guy is notorious, and the construction of the Jingguan is nothing. The hobby of beheading geniuses is really creepy. So don't look at the fact that Liu Baqiao shouted Song Changjing one by one when the king of the Dali domain was not around. Liu Baqiao was very guilty at this moment. Fortunately, the young Jiangxiu didn't care much about his face, so he said with an apologetic smile, "Grandmaster Song, I'm talking about your old man fighting against the peak of the old beast in Zhengyang Mountain. It's really shocking and weeping ghosts and gods. Long, if it weren't for mercy, The mountain protector would have died on the spot on Fulu Street without a corpse. Master Song's high martial arts and good martial virtues really make it difficult for the juniors to beat a horse. Song Changjing smiled and said nothing. Liu Baqiao's forehead was oozing with cold sweat. His back was soaked with sweat, and he finally couldn't say a word and shut his mouth completely angrily. Song Changjing suddenly turned his head to look at the woman opposite. His eyes were playful and interested, and asked, "Are you also a child of the Chen family in Longwei County?" The woman shook her head and said slowly, "No." Song Changjing snorted, thoughtfully. The atmosphere is awkward, until Song Jiksen appeared at the door. The young man saw that there were no chairs and seats in the house, so he casually stood on the threshold and looked at everyone in the house. Song Changjing didn't care about this, and smiled at Liu Baqiao. "Actually, if the young man survived, you are one of the benefactors." If it wasn't for the fact that the young man was provoking provocations at the beginning, he was instructed by others, and in this small town, the guys who dared to trick Zhengyang Mountain were not stupid, and they were all good at planning and then acting. So the old ape felt that the mantis caught the oriole behind the cicada. Oriole must have a high status and not weak skills, which made the old ape, who was unwilling to reveal the slightest flaw, to appear quite embarrassed in the mud bottle alley. So all the way to the westernmost house in the town, the old ape determined, after there were no assassins lurking around. He let go of his hands and feet a little bit, and punched the boy in the straw sandals in the back. Liu Baqiao smiled dryly and said, "Although it's true, I don't want to be this kind of benefactor." Song Changjing smiled. The woman turned her head and glanced at the handsome young man sitting on the threshold. The boy smiled at her. The woman turned her head, expressionless. The young man curled his lips and began to appreciate her long legs openly. She was about 25 or 6 years old, and she was pretty good looking. But the young man thought she was quite interesting. The woman turned her head. Her eyes were cold, and she said hoarsely, "Are you courting death?" Song Jiksen pointed to himself, with a superficial and innocent expression. "Me." Then the young man pointed to Song Changjing, the king of Dali Domain. "Then you have to ask him first." The woman was about to get up. Song Changjing squinted instantly. In the lobby, a majestic coercion hit everyone's heads like a torrential rain, and there was nowhere to hide. Everyone's skin actually caused substantial acupuncture pain. Only Song Jiksen at the door was unaware. Chen Songfeng spoke with difficulty, but his tone was not weak. "Your Highness, this girl is not from our East Treasure Pingzhou, so I hope your Highness will act cautiously." The woman smiled and stood up. "You dare to kill me? Aren't you afraid that your Dali will be wiped out?" Kui Minghuang was about to stop him. I saw the woman fly upside down. The chair behind her turned into dust in the air, and the woman's tall body was completely sunk into the wall, almost like an object embedded in the wall. Song Changjing stood under the wall elusive, with his hands behind his back, raised his head slightly, looked at the bleeding woman, and said with a smile, "Little girl, do you think your father is very powerful? So you are qualified to be in this king. Put it in front of you." "How do you say that word?" The vassal king turned to look at his nephew with a smile, and the young man said with a smile, "Let's talk nonsense." Song Changjing smiled, turned his head, and continued to look at the woman. Although the latter's face was full of pain, her eyes were firm, and she did not ask for any signs of weakness. Song Changjing said, "In your next life, you will never meet this king again." Chen Songfeng's liver and gallbladder were torn apart. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was in extremely complicated emotion, full of anger and fear, and was about to speak. Kui Minghuang had already stepped forward, bowed his head in apology, bowed his head and said sincerely, "My lord, can you give me the next face? And don't have the same knowledge as her." Song Changjing twitched the corners of his mouth, full of sarcasm. The woman who looked into the eyes of the king of the Great Li Domain suddenly closed her eyes as if resigned. At this moment, the young man over the threshold laughed and said, "Uncle, forget it. Bullying a bitch and spreading it out will damage your reputation." Song Changjing's figure paused slightly, and it was extremely subtle. Even Kui Minghuang and Liu Baqiao only felt that the killing god was completely motionless. Song Changjing tilted his head, stretched out 2 fingers, and flicked at will. "It's like dusting off your shoulders." Liu Baqiao, "No!" One of the younger generation in Fenglai Garden was stunned. Kui Minghuang was relieved. Chen Songfeng was like a cloud. Song Changjing smiled at Liu Baqiao. "Boy, yes, this king is optimistic about you." The woman opened her eyes and pulled out herself from the wall. After landing, she shook her body and said to the back, "Let me teach you today. Chen Dui will remember it for 5 years." Song Changjing ignored it and said to Liu Baqiao, "After leaving the town, go to the capital of Dali to find this king. If you have something for you, it depends on whether you can handle it or move it away." Liu Baqiao blurted out, "Fujian." Practitioners all know that the talisman sword is one of the main tools of Taoism. But if a sword can be directly named Fujian, and everyone knows it, one can imagine how amazing this sword will be. Song Changjing and Song Jiksen walked out of the courtyard. The man smiled and said, "Have you finished the bad breath in your heart?" Song Jiksen nodded and said, "It's almost there," regarding Chen Ping'an before. This guy even cheated on his own nephew. Of course, Song Jiksen was full of resentment. Song Jiksen suddenly frowned and asked, "The woman looks great at first glance. Uncle, you are not afraid to beat the small, the big, and the old. If the local county annals didn't lie, then I know how powerful those old kings are, and we will be fine by then." The man settled the boy with just one word. You underestimate the 3 words, Song Changjing, too much. In the lobby, Kui Minghuang sat back in his seat, not showing any expression. Liu Baqiao leaned on the back of the chair and said with lingering fears, "My dear, is the 7th realm and the 8th realm so different from the 9th realm? Feng Leiyuan has 7 warriors and 8 warriors, and they have a good relationship with Liu Baqiao." Kui Minghuang shook his head and said, "In Go, there are also 9 national players, and they are also divided into strong and weak players. There is a big difference. Not to mention, Song Changjing is the strongest player in the 9th realm." Then Kui Minghuang looked at the woman named Chen Duo and asked with concern, "Miss Chen, are you alright?" The woman is also a ruthless person. Although her face is pale, she still smiles calmly. "It's okay." Chen Songfeng seemed to be more anxious than the distant relative of the person in the game. Kui Minghuang sighed in his heart. "I am afraid it will be difficult for the Chen family in Longwei County to stand out in the next big turmoil." Liu Baqiao clicked his tongue and said, with a flick of a finger, "I can bounce my flying sword back to the acupoint without hurting my soul at all. It's incredible." Kui Minghuang joked, "Now you know that there are mountains outside the mountains, and there are people on top of them." Liu Baqiao couldn't eat shit and said with a wicked smile, "Is there someone? Mr. Kuida, you are really not a gentleman at all." Kui Minghuang didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and he didn't bother to pay attention to this stupid person. Liu Baqiao thought about it for a while, and comforted the woman with a strange name, lest she could not think of it for a while. And she was determined to hit the stone with the egg to find Song Changjing's trouble, and then no one in the room would be able to eat and walk around. Chen eldest sister. Although I say that it is a long time ago that other people's ambition destroys their own prestige. But when you meet Song Changjing, you should bow your head and take a step back, which is not a shame. Chen Songfeng hesitated. But the woman hummed and said indifferently, "Song Changjing does have this qualification. I'm not dissatisfied, just unwilling." Liu Baqiao said carelessly, "Actually, you don't need to be reconciled. Look at me. I'm very happy now. When I return to Fenglei Garden, I have another 10 years of cowhide to blow. I actually fought against Dali Song Changjing, even if only one move. But Liu Baqiao survived unscathed in the end. Of course, if I can really get the talisman sword of Dali Capital City, I can blow it for 100 years. The woman's thoughts turned elsewhere. She had no reason to think of the young man sitting on the threshold, the young man who could stop Song Changjing from killing someone with a single word. After the old shopkeeper of Yang's shop returned to the town, he went straight to the yard behind his shop. The shopkeeper pushed open the main house in the backyard and saw an old man sitting on a chair, tinkering with his old tobacco pole. A bowl of tea, smiled and asked, "The shopkeeper, someone is in a hurry to take medicine. Need me to go up the mountain in the dark?" The elderly shopkeeper looked at the old man who was about the same age, shook his head, picked up the tea bowl, and sighed. "Today, I saw a patient from Master Ruin, a young man named Lu who punched a foreigner. I've been beaten and half dead, and I'm feeling uneasy, so I just thought about coming to your side to sit down and take it easy." Old Yang Tu, whose face was wrinkled like the bark of an old locust tree, smiled and said, "The shopkeeper, as long as he sits, is not an outsider." The shopkeeper suddenly remembered something. "By the way, old Yang Tu, a child you helped many years ago is the one in Muipingxiang, the poor baby who gave her mother's medicine at a young age. Is he called Chen Ping'an?" Old Yang Tu was a little surprised, nodded and said, "Yes, that child's mother still left in the end. If I remember correctly, I couldn't survive that winter. After that, I met the child a few times, but not many times. That's it. I really couldn't stand it back then. And I even gave the child a worthless earthwork. What's wrong? Did the child get hurt?" The shopkeeper took a sip of tea and said with a wry smile, "Didn't I just say that the boy's surname is Liu Taoyang? You really are. What a memory." Old Yang Tu laughed and didn't care. The old shopkeeper cautiously and tentatively asked, "Old Yang Tu, should we do something in our shop?" Old Yang Tu picked up the old cigarette rod made of small bamboo and shook it. The shopkeeper, "You don't have to do anything." The old shopkeeper seemed to have taken a reassurance, nodded and said, "This is good. Old Yang, you are busy with you, and I will go first." Just as old Yang Tu was about to stand up to send them off, the old shopkeeper quickly persuaded, No need to send. After the old shopkeeper walked down the steps, he looked back and saw that old Yang was about to close the door. After looking at him, he grinned, and the old shopkeeper hurriedly turned his head and left. When the old shopkeeper took over the shop in his middle age, his father, who was dying on the sickbed, made some weird words in his last words. "When the shop encounters a big problem, I will ask Lao Yang to do as he says." In other words, it seems to have been passed down from your grandfather's time. In the future, when you pass down the shop to the next generation, you must not forget to say this. You must not forget it. At that time, the old shopkeeper nodded vigorously and agreed, and then the old father swallowed his last breath, closed his eyes, and passed away. The night is getting darker. Old Yang's head lit an oil lamp, smashing it, smoking the dry smoke. The old man remembered some old past events, which are just trivial things that are destined to be ignored. An ancestral house that has been passed down from generation to generation, neatly tidy, not like someone in Mud Bottle Alley at all. An honest man squatted at the gate of the courtyard, looked at a handsome and beautiful child, and asked with a smile, "Son, after the new year, are you an adult?" The child raised a hand and said lively and childishly, "Father, I am 5 years old, and I am an adult." The man smiled, feeling a little sad. "Then when my father is away, my mother will take care of you. Can you do it?" The child straightened his back immediately. Yes. The man smiled and stretched out a large hand covered with calluses. Pull the hook. The child quickly stretched out his fair little hand and said happily, the hook cannot be changed for 100 years. The little fingers of the two men pulled the hook, and the thumbs were turned up and tightly next to each other. After the man let go, he stood up slowly, turned his head to look at the graceful figure who was busy in the main room, and strode away suddenly. The child behind him shouted, Dad, candied haws are delicious. The man's lips trembled, turned his head, and squeezed out a smile. Got it. The child is sensible after all. And blinked. Small ones are better. The man turned his head quickly, not daring to look at his son again. He continued on, and muttered, Son, father is gone. Yang's shop, a child who came to buy medicine every 3 weeks and 5 times, was pushed out of the shop by an impatient shop assistant. Broken silver. You can't even buy medicine dregs. How can you be so annoying? You can stay here for a long time. We are a medicine shop. We are doing business, not a temple. And there is no bodhisattva for you to worship, if it wasn't for your young age. I really want to beat people. Go, 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 go! The child clenched the shriveled purse tightly, wanted to cry but insisted not to cry. Still the same set of words repeated over and over again. My mother is still waiting for me to boil the medicine. It has been a long time. My family is really, I have no money. But my mother is really sick. The young man picked up a broom and attacked. The child standing outside the threshold was so frightened that he squatted down, holding his head in both hands, and his left hand still held the purse firmly. After a long time, the child raised his head and found a stern old grandfather standing there, looking at him. The young shop assistant has put down his broom angrily and is busy with his own business. The old man stretched out a hand and said, You give money to buy things, and businessmen make money. It is only right and right. As for making more money and less, it depends on your conscience. But there is absolutely no reason to lose money. So you give me the money bag, then I'll accept a few grains of silver, and I'll give you the herbs your mother needs to treat today on credit. But you'll have to pay back the money in the future, and you can't owe a single cent to the shop. Little guy. Do you understand? The child blinked, confused, but still handed out the purse. In the end, the old man lay on the counter with some difficulty, looking at the little child who could barely see his head, and asked, Do you know how to make medicine? The child and the chicken pecking at the rice. I know. The old man frowned. Do you really know? The child only dared to nod slightly this time. The young guy smiled from a distance. Master Lu went to Mud Bottle Alley at that time, and after seeing his mother, he taught the child once. But then he was worried and watched the child suffer in person, which is strange. The big boy. There is really nothing wrong. It was said by Master Lu himself, so it should be correct. The old man waved to the child. Go. The child happily carried a large bag of medicinal herbs wrapped in butter paper and quickly ran back to Mud Bottle Alley. His mother was lying on the wooden bed. After the child crept into the house, he found that his mother was still sleeping. He touched her forehead and found that it was not hot, so he was relieved. The child then quietly moved one of his mother's hand back to the quilt. The child came to the stove outside the house, started to boil medicine in a clay pot, and started cooking while taking advantage of the space. The child needs to step on the small bench. The child turned the spatula vigorously and was choked by the steaming hot water. He didn't forget to say, it must be cooked deliciously. It must be, otherwise, mother will lose her appetite again. A 5-year-old child, carrying a basket that was almost bigger than others, walked to the mountain outside the town. This is the second time the child has entered the mountain. The first time the old Yang of the Yang family shop took care of the child's weak feet, so he walked very slowly. In addition, the old man only taught the child what kinds of herbs to pick, and the baskets it was also carried by the old man, so the trip into and out of the mountain was actually quite easy. Today was different. The child was facing the scorching sun and carrying a basket on his back, and there was a burning pain in his back. The child walked while crying, gritted his teeth, and walked forward. On that trip, the child did not return to Yang's shop until it was dark, and there was only a thin layer of medicinal herbs in the basket. Old man Yang was furious. The child cried and said that his mother was the only one at home. He was afraid that his mother would be hungry. Otherwise, there would not be only such a few medicinal materials, and he could get up early tomorrow and go to the mountains. The old man was silent, turned around and left, saying only to give him another chance. After less than 2 months, the child's hands and feet are calloused. One day, a sudden torrential rain made the child who went up the mountain to collect herbs and forgot the time to be separated by the stream, watching the turbulent flood water. The child howled and cried in the heavy rain. In the end, when the child couldn't help it, he planned to jump into the stream. At that time, the old man Yang suddenly appeared on the opposite bank, crossed the creek one step at a time, and returned with his child in another step. Soybean-sized raindrops fell on him, and the child laughed happily all the time on the way down the mountain. After going out of the mountain, the old man said, Xiao Ping'an, you help me make a cigarette stick, and I will teach you a little trick on how to climb the mountain without getting tired. The child stretched out his hand to wipe the rain, grinned, and said, Okay. The child bounced back to the Mud Bottle Alley. Today he picked up a rare and precious herb. So the Yang family shop gave some more herbs that his mother needed. The child who had not eaten for a day was walking and suddenly felt a colic in his stomach. At that moment, the child knew that he had eaten the wrong thing on the mountain. The pain started from the stomach, to the hands and feet, and finally to the head. The child squatted down carefully, took off the basket, and took a deep breath, trying to suppress the pain. but a burst of fire was scorching hot. A burst of icy cold swayed. In the end, the child could only roll around in the alley in pain. The child did not dare to shout from beginning to end. No matter how haphazardly his head slammed against the wall of the alley, the child did not cry out in the end. Too close to home. The child is afraid of the mother, who is lying on the bed. During that process, the unconscious child could only feel the beating of his own heart, like the sound of a drum beating close to his ear, rumbling loudly. In Xinhua Alley, a child squatted not far from the candied fruit stall again. He squatted for a while each time. It was not long, but the stall owner remembered that dark little face. Finally, once, the man selling the candied haws plucked off a candied haws and said, with a smile, "Here you are. No charge." The child quickly got up, shook his head, smiled shyly, and ran away. After that, the child was never seen again. That winter, the woman on the sickbed was already scrawny, and her face was naturally dry and ugly. The child who had just prayed for the return from the dilapidated statue went to the iron lock well in Xinhua Lane to fetch water, came to the bed, sat on the small bench, found his mother awake, and asked softly, "Mother, is it better?" The woman smiled hard. "It's much better. It doesn't hurt at all." The child rejoiced. "Mother, it is useful to ask the bodhisattvas." The woman nodded, stretched out a hand tremblingly, and the child hurriedly held his mother's hand. The woman turned sideways with extreme hardship and pain, staring at her child's face. The woman who was suffering from illness, suddenly filled with happiness, and murmured, "How can there be such a good child in the world? And why is it just me? What about your son?" That winter, after all, the woman failed to survive the New Year's Eve, failed to wait for her son to put on the Spring Festival couplets and the door god, and died before she closed her eyes. It just snowed in the town, and she asked her son to go out to see the snow. The woman listened to her son's footsteps running out of the house, closed her eyes, and said reverently and silently, "Sui sweeping, Suian, Suian. My little family is safe. Every year is safe. Every year, every year, every year, every year. Everything is safe and sound." From that day on, Chen Pingan became an orphan, just from child to teenager.